The wind in Wyoming doesn't just howl, it screams. And in the dead of winter, 1887, it was screaming Sarah McKenna's name. She was 6 months pregnant, running from a life that had tried to bury her, with nothing but a threadbare shawl and a secret growing in her belly. She thought she was running toward freedom. She had no idea she was running straight into a story that would change everything. She stumbled upon it like a ghost in the blizzard, a small log cabin, half swallowed by the snow. The chimney was cold, the windows dark. It looked like a tomb. But for a woman who couldn't walk another mile, a tomb with a roof was better than a grave in the snow. The door creaked open on its own, and what she found inside would set in motion a chain of events so twisted, so unbelievable, that no one would see the end coming. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sickness and despair. A man lay on a straw mattress, his face a pale mask of fever, his breathing shallow and rough. He was dying. In the corner, 2 small children were huddled together, their eyes wide with a fear that went deeper than hunger. The little girl, maybe 8 years old, clutched a handmade wooden horse to her chest. The boy, younger still, just stared, too broken to even cry. Sarah wasn't a saint. She was a survivor. But looking at that man, at those children, she knew she couldn't just walk away. She had stumbled out of her own nightmare, only to walk directly into someone else's. She spent the next 2 weeks in a waking dream, a constant cycle of stoking the fire, spooning broth between the man's cracked lips, and calming the children's fears. She learned their names were Jacob, Emma, and Thomas. She learned from the quiet dignity of the cabin, the perfectly fitted logs, the sturdy stone fireplace, that this had once been a happy home. And then she found the journal. It was tucked under a loose floorboard, its leather cover soft with age. It belonged to Mary, Jacob's wife. Sarah learned about their dreams, about Jacob's quiet strength, about his nightmares from his time as a cavalry officer. The final entry was dated 3 months ago. It spoke of a sickness in her lungs, and a deep, gnawing fear of leaving Jacob and the children alone. 3 months. Jacob had buried his wife, and then grief had tried to bury him right alongside her. The day Jacob's fever finally broke, his eyes, the color of worn leather, focused on her for the first time. "You don't have to stay," he rasped, his voice raw. "I know you've got somewhere else to be." How could she tell him? How could she explain that this cabin, this broken family, felt more like home than the gilded cage she'd fled in Boston? How could she tell him about her husband, Charles Worthington III, a man who decorated her with bruises and called it love? "The children need someone," she said instead, "until you're on your feet." Jacob studied her, his gaze sharp and assessing. He was a man used to reading people, and Sarah felt like an open book. But he didn't judge, he just nodded, a weary understanding passing between them. "What's your story, Sarah McKenna?" he asked, using the maiden name she'd given him. The question hung in the air, thick as smoke. She felt the weight of the wedding ring she still wore, a brand from a life she prayed was truly over. "I'm running from a life that wasn't mine," she whispered, the truth spilling out before she could stop it, "and hoping to find one that is." Jacob's gaze shifted to his children, who were now cautiously playing by the fire. "Mary used to say that sometimes the best families aren't the ones you're born into," he said, his voice soft, "but the ones you choose." He looked back at Sarah, a flicker of something new in his eyes. "She would have liked you." And in that moment, a fragile peace began to settle over the homestead. The days found a new rhythm. Sarah cooked and cleaned. Jacob, growing stronger, handled the animals and the woodpile. Emma started to smile again, and Thomas, won over by Sarah's patient repair of his wooden horse, began to follow her like a shadow. They were 4 broken people, huddled together against the Wyoming winter. They thought they were just surviving. They had no idea they were becoming a family. And they had no idea that the past was a patient hunter, and it was closing in faster than they could ever imagine. The children started calling her Mama Sarah. The first time Emma said it, The words slipped out so naturally that Sarah's hands froze in the middle of braiding the little girl's hair. Her heart clenched with a feeling so fierce, so protective, it stole her breath. Jacob heard it, and his quiet nod of approval sealed the deal. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She had a place. She found herself watching Jacob, noticing the quiet strength in his hands, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at his children. He never asked about her past, never pressed her for details. He just accepted her, and in his acceptance, she began to heal. The baby inside her, once a source of terror, now felt like a promise. A promise of a future where a child could be loved for who they were, not what they represented. She started to believe she could be safe here. She started to believe she could build a new life. She was wrong. The trip to Cedar Ridge was Jacob's idea. They needed supplies, and he was finally strong enough to make the journey. The town was little more than a dusty street and a railroad depot, a tiny nerve center connecting the vast wilderness to the outside world. Sarah kept her head down, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach with every stranger's glance. She felt exposed, vulnerable. The feeling was a premonition. It happened at the post office. The clerk, a thin man with glasses that made his eyes look like a fish's, looked up as Jacob collected their mail. "Got a telegram here for a Sarah McKenna," he said, his voice casual. Sarah's blood ran cold. No one knew that name. No one knew she was here. It was impossible. Her hands trembled as she took the yellow slip of paper. Jacob's eyes were on her, sharp and concerned. The words swam before her, then snapped into horrifying focus. "Sarah, stop. Location discovered. Stop. Family demands return. Stop. Child belongs to Worthington Estate. Stop. Legal action proceeding. Stop. Edmund Worthington." The telegram fell from her numb fingers. Edmund, Charles's older brother, a man colder and more ruthless than her dead husband had ever been. Jacob picked it up. She watched his jaw tighten, a muscle twitching in his cheek as he read the words. The world outside the dusty post office window seemed to fade away. The sanctuary she had found, the fragile peace she had built, shattered into a million pieces. The ride back to the homestead was silent, the crunch of the wagon wheels on the snow the only sound. The storm she had been running from had finally found her. And it was about to make landfall right in the heart of the only home she'd ever truly known. That night, after the children were asleep, Jacob built up the fire. The flames cast long, dancing shadows on the cabin walls, shadows that felt like they were reaching for her. Mary's old journal lay on the table between them, a silent witness. "Tell me about the Worthingtons," Jacob said, his voice low and steady. So she did. She told him everything. About the wealth, the power, the suffocating expectations. She told him about Charles, about his fists and his charm, two sides of the same cruel coin. She told him how Charles had died in a carriage accident just after she'd fled, and how his family blamed her for his recklessness. "The baby," she whispered, her hand instinctively covering her belly. "Charles never knew. I found out after the funeral. I thought if I could disappear, I could give my child a life free from them. But they found you," Jacob stated, not a question. "Edmund is a bloodhound. If he's involved, it means they've decided the baby is an asset. A Worthington heir is a powerful thing." Her voice broke. "They'll say I'm an unfit mother. They'll say I'm living in sin. And in the eyes of the law, with their money and their lawyers, they'll be right." She stood and paced to the window, her reflection a ghostly figure against the dark, snowy landscape. She felt trapped, the walls of the cabin closing in just like the walls of her Boston mansion once had. She turned back to find Jacob watching her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Is that what you think you're doing?" he asked. "Living in sin?" "I think I'm surviving," she shot back, a spark of her old fire returning. "But it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what a judge will think." Jacob leaned forward. "There's something you should know about me, Sarah." He stood, walked to the mantelpiece, and reached behind a framed photo of Mary. He pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a medal. It was the Congressional Medal of Honor. Sarah stared, her mind struggling to connect the quiet homesteader she knew with the hero this medal represented. "I wasn't just a cavalryman," Jacob said, his voice dropping even lower. "I was an officer, served under General Crook. I have connections, Sarah, people who owe me favors. The Worthingtons have money in Boston, but this is Wyoming. Out here, a man's reputation is worth more than gold." The revelation stunned her into silence. This quiet, grieving man was a decorated war hero. He had secrets of his own. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I came out here to forget that life," he said, his gaze distant. "To build something peaceful. But if someone threatens my family—" He looked her straight in the eye, and she saw the steel that had been hiding there all along. "I remember how to fight." "Your family?" she whispered. "Emma and Thomas call you Mama Sarah. You nursed me back to health. You've cared for my children like they were your own. That baby you're carrying." He gestured to her. "In every way that matters, you are family, and I protect what's mine." His words were a shield, a fortress walling her in, but what was he really offering? "Jacob, you don't know these people. They'll destroy you." "They can try," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "They have money and lawyers, but I have something they don't." "What's that?" "The right cause," he said simply. "They want to take a child from its mother for greed and pride. I want to keep a family together. That kind of fight. It gives a man strength." He reached across the space between them, his calloused hand covering hers. "We fight them. Together." Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to fall. "Why? Why would you risk everything for me?" "Because you walked into our lives and you saved us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just save me from a fever. You saved us from giving up." Emma smiles again. "Thomas doesn't wake up screaming. You gave us a reason to see tomorrow." The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. A storm was coming, a human hurricane named Worthington. But for the first time since she'd fled Boston, Sarah realized she might not have to face it alone. She had found a man willing to stand with her. But as she looked at him, at the metal glinting in the firelight, a new, cold fear began to creep in. A man like Jacob, a man with that kind of past, didn't just have friends who owed him favors. He had enemies who wanted him dead. And she had just painted a target on his back. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Fighting together." "It means we stop running," Jacob said, his thumb tracing a line across her knuckles. It was a touch more reassuring than any promise she'd ever known. "It means we make a stand. Right here." He then revealed the full depth of what they were up against. The Medal of Honor was a testament to his heroism, but it was also a marker of his past. And his past was more complicated than she knew. "My discharge wasn't clean, Sarah," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the fire. "I was court-martialed." The air in the cabin went still. "For what?" "For refusing a direct order. An order to attack a village of non-combatants. Women, children, old men." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but she could feel the rage simmering beneath the surface. "They called it insubordination. I called it decency. The charges were eventually dropped, but the record exists. The Worthingtons. They'll find it. They'll twist it. They'll paint me as a disgraced soldier, a dangerous man unfit to be around children." The chill that ran down Sarah's spine had nothing to do with the winter outside. Edmund wouldn't just attack her character. He would scorch the earth around her, destroying anyone who stood by her side. "So they'll use your honor against you," she breathed. "They'll try," he said, "which is why we have to be smarter. We have to be stronger." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Sarah, there's a way to strengthen our position, a way to make it harder for any court to tear this family apart." She waited, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "We get married," he said. The word hung in the air, audacious and terrifying. "For real? Legally? If you are my wife, if this child is born into a legal marriage on my land, their case gets weaker. If I legally adopt Emma and Thomas and you are their mother, He let the sentence hang. It builds a wall they might not be able to break. Her mind reeled. Marriage. To Charles it had been a prison sentence, a transaction of property and status. What Jacob was proposing was a strategy, a shield. But was that all it was? Jacob, I can't ask you to do that, to tie your life, your children's lives, to my fight. You're not asking, he said gently, cupping her face in his hands. His touch was warm, steady. I'm offering. Sarah, look at me. When you found us, I was ready to die. You didn't just give me my life back. You gave me a reason to want it. Marrying you. It's not a burden. It would be an honor. She searched his eyes, looking for any hint of pity or duty. She found only a deep, unwavering sincerity. She saw the man who had earned that medal not through violence, but through compassion. She saw the father who treasured his children, and she saw something else, something new and fragile, aimed directly at her. The children, she whispered, thinking of Emma and Thomas. Emma asked me yesterday if you were going to be her real mama forever, he said, a soft smile on his lips. They've already accepted you, Sarah. This just makes it official in the eyes of the world. Snow began to fall outside, thick flakes tapping against the window pane. It felt like the world was sealing them in, giving them a pocket of time to prepare for the war that was coming. She thought of Charles's cold proposal in a Boston drawing room. Then she looked at Jacob, this quiet hero in a humble cabin, offering not a life of ease, but a life of purpose, a life worth fighting for. Yes, she breathed, the single word carrying the weight of her entire future. Yes, I'll marry you, Jacob Thorne. His smile transformed his face, wiping away the years of grief. He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, reverent press of his lips that was more a vow than a kiss. They were no longer two broken people. They were a united front. But as the snow fell, blanketing their small homestead, Sarah couldn't shake a terrifying thought. They were preparing to fight the Worthingtons. But the court-martial Jacob mentioned, the officer he defied. A man like that wouldn't just disappear. What if he was still out there? What if he was more powerful than ever? What if the Worthingtons weren't the only enemy marching toward them? The wedding was as simple as the life they were trying to build. The circuit pastor, a man with a face as weathered as the Wyoming landscape, performed the ceremony right there in the cabin. Emma, her face glowing, tucked dried wildflowers into Sarah's hair. Thomas, solemn and proud, was the keeper of the ring, Mary's ring, which Jacob slipped onto Sarah's finger with a look that promised more than any fancy vow ever could. She was now Sarah Thorne, legally, irrevocably. It felt different than her first marriage. It felt real. Their life settled into a new pattern, a quiet dance of shared duties and growing intimacy. They were husband and wife, but Jacob was patient. He gave her space, never demanding more than she was ready to give. He was building her trust, not just assuming it. One evening she found him in the barn, carving a tiny, perfect cradle for Emma's doll. His large, calloused hands moved with a surprising grace. "Practicing for the baby?" she asked softly. He looked up, a shy smile on his face. "Thought I should. Mary. She made the cradles for Emma and Thomas. She was always better at the fine work." He didn't say it with sadness, but with a quiet pride that touched her heart. Mary wasn't a ghost between them. She was a part of the foundation. "Teach me," Sarah said, placing her hand over his. "I want to learn. I've spent too many years being decorative, Jacob. I want to be useful." So he taught her. Night after night, his hands would guide hers, teaching her the feel of the wood, the rhythm of the blade. "You have to work with the grain," he'd say, "not against it." And she knew he wasn't just talking about woodworking. But the world outside their peaceful bubble was stirring. Letters began to arrive in Cedar Ridge, forwarded from lawyers in Boston. They were building their case, painting her as a deranged runaway, and Jacob as a man of questionable character. "They've found the court-martial papers," Jacob told her one night, his face grim in the lamplight. "They're framing me as a rogue soldier, a danger to society." "But they haven't found anything else?" she asked, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. No other enemies? Nothing they can use, he said. But his eyes flickered away for a fraction of a second. It was a small thing, almost unnoticeable. But she saw it. He was hiding something. Another piece of the past he hadn't shared. What was he not telling her? Who else was out there? Then the pain started. Sharp, sudden cramps that doubled her over. She was only 7 months along. It was too soon. Jacob found her in the snow behind the cabin, pale and shaking, and carried her inside. The doctor from town, a kindly old man named Morrison, made the treacherous journey to their homestead. His diagnosis was stark. "The baby is fine for now," he said, his expression serious. "But Mrs. Thorne needs complete rest. No physical strain, and more importantly, no stress. Worry is the worst thing for an expecting mother." Jacob became her warden, her protector. He took over every chore, insisting she do nothing but rest. But you can't order a person to stop worrying. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind sounded like the approach of a threat. And then, one afternoon, she saw it. A man on a ridge, far in the distance, watching their homestead through a spyglass. He wasn't dressed like a rancher or a trapper. He wore a dark coat, the kind a man from the city might wear. She told Jacob, and the next day he rode out to investigate. He came back hours later, his face set like stone. "He's gone," he said, "but he left this." He opened his hand. In his palm was a single spent shell casing. It wasn't from a hunting rifle. It was military issue. The message was clear. "We see you. We can reach you." The watcher wasn't from the Worthingtons. This was something else. This was Jacob's secret, the one he hadn't shared. That night she confronted him. "Who was it, Jacob? Who is watching us?" He finally broke. "His name is Major Alistair Finch," he said, his voice heavy with a history she was only just beginning to understand. "He was my commanding officer. He was the one who gave the order to burn that village." Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. The court-martial. It was a sham. Finch had powerful friends. They buried his crime and tried to bury me with it. When the charges were dropped, I thought it was over. But Finch, he holds a grudge. He believes I ruined his career. He believes I cost him a promotion to general. "And he's here?" she whispered, horrified. "Why now?" "I don't know," Jacob admitted, and the uncertainty in his voice scared her more than anything. "But it can't be a coincidence. Someone told him where I was." The pieces started to click into place, forming a terrifying picture. Edmund Worthington, with his vast resources, must have dug into Jacob's past. He didn't just find the court-martial record, he found the man behind it. He had found Jacob's other enemy and unleashed him. Edmund wasn't just trying to win in court. He was trying to win by any means necessary. He was trying to eliminate Jacob from the equation entirely. The baby was coming. Sarah knew it with a primal certainty. The pain started in the dead of night, weeks ahead of schedule, with a force that stole her breath. A spring thaw had turned the roads to impassable rivers of mud. Dr. Morrison couldn't get through. They were on their own. Jacob moved with the calm efficiency of a soldier facing a battle. He sent a terrified Thomas to the neighbors, but Emma, her face a mask of fierce determination, refused to leave. "I'm staying," the 8-year-old declared. "Mama Sarah needs me." The labor was a storm, a tempest of pain and effort that pushed Sarah to the edge of her endurance. But through it all, Jacob was her anchor. His hands were sure, his voice a steady presence in the chaos. And Emma was a tiny, tireless general, fetching water, holding her hand, her calm presence a miracle. As the pain threatened to swallow her whole, Sarah did something she hadn't planned. She pulled the silver locket from around her neck, the only heirloom she had from her own mother. "Emma," she gasped, pressing it into the little girl's hand. "This is for you, from mother to daughter. You are my daughter now." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, understanding the sacredness of the gift. It was a passing of the torch, a promise of a future, even as Sarah feared she might not live to see it. Just as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, her son was born. He entered the world with a lusty cry, a declaration that he had arrived, healthy and strong. Jacob cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, his movements full of a reverence that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. He placed the warm, wriggling bundle in her arms. "A son," Jacob whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a son." He had Jacob's dark hair and Sarah's deep blue eyes. He was perfect. "Daniel," Jacob said, looking from Sarah to their child. "It means God is my judge." Seems fitting. "Daniel Jacob Thorne," Sarah whispered, testing the name. It felt right. It felt like theirs, but their relief was short-lived. In the days that followed, Sarah's recovery was slow. She was weak, and the fear of what lay beyond their cabin door was a constant, draining presence. Then, 2 weeks after Daniel's birth, they came. 3 men on horseback, dressed in dark city suits that looked alien against the rugged landscape. Jacob saw them first. He moved to the rifle rack by the door, his actions economical and deadly serious. "Emma," he said, his voice low, "take Thomas and Daniel into the back room. Stay there." Sarah watched from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. Daniel slept in her arms, oblivious to the danger that had arrived on their doorstep. The man in the center was older, with cold, arrogant eyes that Sarah recognized from photographs. "Mr. Thorne," the man called out, his voice carrying an unnatural politeness. "My name is Edmund Worthington. I believe you know why I'm here." "I know exactly why you're here," Jacob replied, his voice like flint. "And I know you're not welcome on my land." "We're not here for trouble," Worthington said with a thin reptilian smile. "We're here to collect what belongs to our family, the child." "The only child here is my son," Jacob stated, his rifle held loosely but purposefully at his side. "Daniel Thorne, born to my wife on my land." "A legal fiction we will soon correct," Worthington sneered. "This doesn't have to be difficult." Suddenly, from the ridge behind Worthington, a 4th rider appeared. It was the man with the spyglass, Major Alistair Finch. He didn't ride down to join them. He just sat on his horse, a silent, menacing silhouette against the sky. A sniper, watching the scene unfold. The threat was no longer implied. It was real, and it was pointed directly at Jacob's head. Worthington had brought more than lawyers. He had brought an assassin. "Get off my land," Jacob said, his voice dropping to a deadly command. "Now." Worthington and his men turned and rode away, but it wasn't a retreat. It was a tactical withdrawal. They had shown their hand. They had revealed the depths of their depravity. When Jacob came back inside, his face was a grim mask. "They'll be back," he said, "with court orders, and he'll be waiting." He nodded toward the ridge where Finch had been. That night, the full weight of their situation crashed down on Sarah. They were trapped. A legal battle was coming, a battle they might not win, and a physical threat, a trained killer, was lurking in the hills, waiting for his moment. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jacob pulled Mary's old journal from the shelf. He had read it many times, but this time he was looking for something specific. He flipped to the back pages, where Mary had made notes about the homestead. "Mary wrote about everything," he murmured, his finger tracing the faded ink. "The well depth, the crop rotations, the property lines." He stopped. "And this." He pointed to a crudely drawn map of their land. In one corner, near an outcropping of rock Sarah had never paid much attention to, was a small, strange symbol and a single word: cave. "A cave?" Sarah asked, confused. "Not just a cave," Jacob said, a strange light entering his eyes. "Mary's family lived here before her. They used it during the Indian raids. It's hidden. The entrance is behind a rockfall. You could walk right past it 100 times and never know it was there." He looked at Sarah, then at the children. "If they come for us, if Finch makes a move, that's where we go. It's our last line of defense, our sanctuary. A secret cave, a hidden escape route." It was a sliver of hope in a sea of despair. A few days later, the official papers arrived. A territorial marshal delivered a thick packet of documents. It was worse than they imagined. The Worthingtons weren't just claiming Daniel. They were petitioning to have Jacob's custody of Emma and Thomas revoked, citing his disgraceful military record and unstable character. They were trying to annul their marriage, claiming Sarah had deceived Jacob. They were trying to erase their family from existence. The petition was filled with lies, half-truths, and twisted evidence. A forged marriage certificate with an earlier date to make it seem like Daniel was conceived while she was still married to Charles. Affidavits from Boston doctors claiming she suffered from hysteria. It was a meticulous, calculated campaign of character assassination. And then, Sarah saw the signature on one of the key affidavits. It was the doctor who had treated her for the injuries Charles had inflicted. The one person who knew the truth of her abuse. He had betrayed her. He had sold his soul to the Worthingtons. But Jacob found something else, buried deep in the legal jargon. A geological survey attached as an addendum. Why would they include this? He wondered aloud. The survey detailed the mineral composition of the land in their county. It was mostly standard information, but then he saw it. A section highlighting a rare quartz deposit, valuable for new industrial processes. The largest concentration of this deposit was mapped directly onto their homestead. It was never about the baby. It was never just about family pride, Sarah breathed, the terrible truth dawning on her. This land, it's worth a fortune. Daniel, he's just the key. If they get custody of him, they control his inheritance. And his inheritance is this land. Their entire lives, their love story, their family. It was all just a footnote in a greedy land grab. The court hearing was set for 6 weeks' time, in Cheyenne. 6 weeks to prepare a defense against an enemy with unlimited resources and no morals. As the days counted down, the tension in the cabin was a living thing. The threat of Finch on the ridge meant they could never relax. Jacob taught Sarah how to shoot, her hands clumsy at first, then growing steady. He fortified the cabin, boarding up windows, reinforcing the door. He also started quietly stocking the hidden cave with supplies, water, dried food, blankets, ammunition. Their community rallied around them. Pastor Williams, Dr. Morrison, old Mrs. Henderson, they all offered to travel to Cheyenne to testify. Letters of support came from men who had served under Jacob, praising his character and leadership. General Crook himself sent a powerful letter of commendation, calling Jacob's refusal to obey an immoral order an act of the highest moral courage. They were building an arsenal of truth to fight the Worthingtons' mountain of lies. One night, just a week before they were set to leave for Cheyenne, Sarah was woken by a sound, the soft nicker of a horse, too close to the cabin. She looked to Jacob's bedroll. It was empty. Her heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed the rifle and crept to the window. In the pale moonlight, she saw 2 figures by the barn, Jacob and another man. It was Major Finch. They weren't fighting, they were talking. Sarah's mind spun. Was Jacob making a deal? Had he betrayed her to save his children? The fear was a cold, sharp blade in her gut. She watched as Finch handed Jacob a small leather pouch. Jacob took it, nodded, and then Finch mounted his horse and rode away, disappearing into the darkness. Jacob came back inside, his face unreadable. He saw her standing there, rifle in hand, her eyes wide with fear and accusation. He didn't say a word. He just opened the leather pouch and poured its contents onto the table. It was a pile of letters. "They're from Mary," Jacob said, his voice rough. "Finch intercepted our mail for months after I was discharged. He was trying to find something to use against me, to finish the job the court-martial started. He read my wife's letters to me. He held them hostage." Sarah stared at the letters, then at Jacob's face, finally understanding. "He wasn't here to kill you." "No," Jacob said. "He was here because he finally grew a conscience. Worthington found him, offered him a fortune to take me out. But Finch couldn't do it. He told me everything. He said destroying a man's reputation is one thing, but killing him in front of his family. Even he had a line he wouldn't cross. He gave me the letters and told me to disappear." It was the most unexpected twist of all. Their hired assassin had turned out to be their secret informant. Finch had also given Jacob something else, a copy of his own correspondence with Edmund Worthington, hard proof that Worthington had conspired to commit murder. They now had a weapon that could not only win their case, but destroy Edmund Worthington utterly. The courtroom in Cheyenne was a theater of war. On one side, Edmund Worthington and his team of slick Boston lawyers, confident and smug. On the other, Sarah and Jacob, with their one honest lawyer, a former cavalryman who had served with Jacob. Their faces were grim but resolute. The Worthingtons presented their case first, weaving a masterful tapestry of lies. They presented the forged documents, the paid-for testimonies, the twisted medical records. They painted Sarah as a hysterical runaway and Jacob as a disgraced, violent soldier. To anyone who didn't know the truth, it was a damning picture. Then, it was their turn. Their lawyer, Samuel Harrison, began by dismantling the lies one by one. Dr. Morrison's records proved the real timeline of Sarah's pregnancy. Pastor Williams testified to the legality and sincerity of their marriage. But the tide truly turned when Jacob took the stand. He spoke of his service, of the medal he earned for saving lives, not taking them. He spoke of the court-martial, not with shame, but with the quiet pride of a man who had chosen his conscience over his career. When Worthington's lawyer tried to grill him about disobeying orders, Jacob looked the man dead in the eye. "There is a difference between law and justice," he said, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom. "I swore an oath to my country, not to one man's immoral command. I would make the same choice again today." Then, Harrison brought up Major Alistair Finch. He presented the letters Finch had given Jacob, the proof that Worthington had conspired to commit murder. A gasp went through the courtroom. Edmund Worthington's face went white. His lawyers scrambled, objecting, but the judge, a stern, fair-minded man of the frontier, allowed the evidence. The foundation of Worthington's case crumbled to dust, but Harrison wasn't finished. He called his final witness. The defense calls Emma Thorne to the stand. The 9-year-old girl walked to the stand with a poise that belied her age. She looked at the judge, her eyes clear and honest. She told her story, of her mother's death, of her father's sickness, of the cold and the fear. "And what happened when Mama Sarah came?" Harrison asked gently. Emma's face lit up. "She saved us," she said simply. "She made Papa better. She cooked us food. She held us when we were scared. She brought the sunshine back into our house." "And Daniel?" Harrison asked. "Your baby brother?" "He's our baby," Emma said, her voice fierce, looking directly at Edmund Worthington. "He belongs with us. You can't have him. Love is more important than money." Out of the mouths of babes, the courtroom was silent, every person moved by the simple, powerful truth of her words. The judge didn't even need to recess. He slammed his gavel down. "Custody of the minor child, Daniel Thorne, is hereby granted to his parents, Jacob and Sarah Thorne. Furthermore," he said, his eyes boring into Edmund Worthington, "this court will recommend the territorial prosecutor launch a full investigation into the petitioner and his associates for conspiracy, perjury, and attempted murder." It was over. They had won. Not just the case, but the war. As they walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Wyoming sun, their friends and neighbors cheering, Sarah held Daniel tight. Jacob wrapped his arm around her, and Emma and Thomas clung to their hands. They were a family, forged in fire, bound by love, and vindicated by truth. The journey home was different. The land didn't seem menacing anymore. It felt like it was welcoming them back. When their homestead came into view, it wasn't just a cabin. It was their castle, their kingdom. A year later, Sarah sat in a new rocking chair, a beautiful, sturdy piece Jacob had built with his own hands. Daniel, now a boisterous toddler, took his first wobbly steps across the floor into Emma's waiting arms. Thomas was carving a wooden train, his face a mask of concentration. Jacob had been made the county sheriff. His reputation for integrity had become legend. The Henderson place next door had gone up for sale, and they had bought it. their land and their future expanding. They were building a legacy. There was talk of a new schoolhouse, and Jacob had insisted there was only one person for the job of teacher, Sarah. Life had settled into a beautiful, peaceful rhythm, but they never forgot the storms they had weathered. Mary's journal and the pouch of stolen letters sat on the mantelpiece, reminders of the secrets and battles that had forged their family. One evening, as Jacob read a bedtime story to the children, a fairy tale he'd invented about a brave princess who saved a dying king, Sarah looked around her home. The warm glow of the fire, the sound of her children's laughter, her husband's steady voice, the sleeping baby in the cradle Jacob had made. She had stumbled into this cabin a broken, frightened refugee. She had found a dying man and his shattered children. She had faced down a powerful dynasty and a hired killer, and in the heart of the unforgiving Wyoming winter, she hadn't just found a home. She had found herself. She was no longer the woman running from her past, but the woman who had built a future where love was the law and family was the greatest treasure of all. And she knew, with a certainty that filled her soul, that their story, the real story, was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and found family, please hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the incredible tale we have for you tomorrow.